The session is being recorded. We'll be able to distribute a video of this recording later to any of your colleagues who couldn't join today. We've got a pretty good turnout, and obviously lots of you have been to lots of the other sessions of the Digital Summit, so feel free to share that link with your colleagues if they can't make it today. Anyway, so let's have a look. ABACUS 7. So, yep, as I said before, my name is Tim O'Neill. I've been with the company since it started, so that's certainly 20 years now. As you know about us, we're a leader in the market. In fact, just recently you probably saw on the latest Magic Quadrant came out from Gartner, and we're the leader in the Magic Quadrant. For those of you that know the two axes that there are in the Magic Quadrant, the horizontal axis is actually the visionary axis or the strategy axis. So we are recognized as the most visionary vendor on the market. So I guess some of these things we're going to show you today is what's led to that sort of recognition. So we're very proud, of course, of our position on the MQ. And of course, you know, we find it a pretty good validation of this work we've been doing for 20 years. And we're going to give you guys a bit of a preview of some of the stuff that probably contributed to that, and obviously is going to be the things you'll see going into the new year. With that, I guess I'll pass to Andrew to introduce himself.
Yep. Hi, my name is Andrew Luthwaite. I work as a pre-sales consultant for Avolution, and I have done for close to 7 years now. So it's a lot of sevens flying around in his WebEx. And I've worked across many different industries and customers. So certainly I'll be going through some of the key features that are going to be helping hopefully some current and new customers that we have coming on board.
Great. So, yes, we could say maybe you're the brains, I'm the brawn. No, probably the other way around, is it? Actually, you're the brawn, I'm the brains. Anyway, great. Next slide. Okay, so a bit of a brief summary. Like I said, ABACUS 7's due out in about a month. We're certainly in final testing for most of it. A few of the features are getting the rough edges smoothed off. But there's many different features that we can be looking forward to, and we've sort of highlighted a few of them here. We're going to present each of these in detail, so I'm not going to spend too long walking through them now. I don't want to steal Andrew's thunder when he comes to showing the different features. But first and foremost, it's important to mention that we're calling it ABACUS 7 because it's what we refer to as a platform release. Okay, so we do 3 types of releases. We do platform releases. A platform release is one where everybody needs to be on the same version. Okay, so it's a fundamental release. It's the file repository format is different, so everyone needs to be on the same repository format. So it will be a platform release. So of course, our account managers will work with each of you to update and get everyone on the same version. We then have what we call feature releases. We aim to do a feature release every few months. So I know we did one last month. So the next release, of course, is going to be a platform release, but it is also going to have some new features in it. So a platform release has got features in it as well, like a feature release. And the other type of release we, of course, do is just a bug release or a patch release. So ABACUS 7 is a platform release, though. So you'll all need to upgrade to it. So it's got some pretty fundamental features in it too, which is what we'll sort of go through today. And there is, hundreds literally of things that we're doing. We've got a whole continuous release approach, which again, Andrew will talk about later, but these are just going to be some of the headlines that we're going to introduce you to today. I think you all probably know how ABACUS hangs together as a suite, but just in case, we've sort of put this slide in here to just kind of position some of the dare I say the stack or the way that we see the suite hanging together. So there's a number of products in the suite. There is what we call ABACUS Studio, which most of you know is the kind of heavy lifting power user product. So if you look in the graphic on the right, we sort of see that as the bedrock. It's the roots that hold everything together. So it's where you do your bulk uploading and things like that. It's where you set permissions. It's where you do configuring of the meta model. Okay, it's where you set up viewpoints, and that's going to be pretty interesting. You'll see how we can really leverage that later. But it's where the kind of experts work or the power users work. Okay, so it's only a subset of the user community. All of the work the studio does works against what we call a collaboration server, which is of course the repository, and that's hosted in either ourselves in Amazon or yourselves in your own data centers. But it's where all the the data is persisted. Sitting on top of that is Abacus Enterprise, which is, of course, our collaboration environment. Okay, so it's not just read-only, it's where you contribute and you collaborate, you input content, you generate things, you integrate with things like Slack and Teams and all that kind of stuff. You have all those sort of different integrations, you generate visualizations. It's where all the bulk of the users work. Okay, so that's Abacus Enterprise. Sitting on the sides, you have Abacus integrations. So, of course, we plug into things like ServiceNow and Technopedia and, good old Google and Excel spreadsheets, and you do all that kind of, uploading and stuff like that. And those things, invariably work on a schedule so that, you set up an integration with something like ServiceNow and it just pulls all the content daily and, reconciles all the differences or something like that. You can also push out as well. So we have obviously push adapters as well. There's a full API, of course, and many of you use that already. That's fine. Then there's the black box, dare I say, the analytics engine. So that's where a lot of the smarts works. So that's, again, hosted typically by us in our Amazon environment. It's where the algorithms run. We'll be showing you some machine learning stuff. So it's where the machine learning stuff works. So there's some pretty computationally intensive stuff that happens there. But thankfully, you guys don't have to worry about that. We do, because, it's where we host things and have some pretty beefy servers to do all that. So certainly it's just a case of effectively turning it on from within the user environment. So either from Studio or Enterprise, you kind of can opt in or opt out sort of thing. But if you've opted in, it does just kick in and start working behind the scenes. Okay, so there's a lot of computationally cool stuff that happens, and we'll show you. But that's basically the, for want of a better word, the architecture of how Abacus Suite hangs together. And with that, I will pass to Andrew to sort of take you through those major headline features and yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tim. So the first feature, and there are a handful of these as Tim has outlined, but the first one we're going to be taking a look at is what we call a graph view. Graph views in Abacus, there are usually a few use cases, a few scenarios where these become very useful. The first is actually trying to understand specifically complexity around certain areas of your model. And you'll see this running in the video on the right hand side, but essentially graph views allow you to start exploring architectures that you already have. You can see that you can actually start changing some of the values in here in this catalog based view. And you'll also notice, those of the keen eye, how these graph views are constantly updating. So they're pretty much live views as we start changing properties, as we start adding connections, in this case to new servers, you'll see those populated on that graph view. And we've combined the graph view in this particular instance with an entire dashboard-based view. So those of you who are familiar with dashboards, and they are effectively a collection of different views or portlets. And the benefit here, of course, is not only changing the data or adding new data, you're using these dashboards to filter these graph views as well. Okay, so the graph views themselves are pretty intuitive. As you can imagine, it's a case of clicking on any of these objects to expand them, to see the detail underneath, and of course, minimizing them if you want to reduce some of the complexity that's on the screen there. But it is really about trying to explore some of the relationships that you have in your model. And so I mentioned that being the first use case, if you like, so some kind of detailed view of a specific domain or a specific area. Then there's a more generic use case, if you like, which is a bit more of an exploratory view. So you can start leveraging these graph views to firstly understand the complexity of certain areas. So you'll see here drilling down into different UK divisions, different data centers, seeing the underlying technology or the infrastructure that's supported at those data centers. And what this does give you is almost this kind of fireworks explosion view, showing you all of that detail. The thing to bear in mind here is that these are all based on the viewpoints that you would have defined in Abacus Studio, as Tim has mentioned. So the notation that we're using here, and you'll see a couple of examples pop up on the screen, is dependent on those viewpoints. So traditionally now you can think of it as almost like a single dashboard, and that gives users the ability to drill down into these graph views with different stakeholders, different business owners, and that means that you can quite easily then get a wider audience involved. Okay, so the different notations that you're seeing here, you might have data architects trying to understand the level of detail, where that information is held, and who has access to that data. So this really does give them an opportunity to do that without traditionally drawing manual diagrams. This is all live, this is all automated, which means you have much more of a self-service environment now for different users and different stakeholders.
Okay, so just one thing I'd also like to add is what you're seeing here is what we refer to as the kind of layered notation, or the layered way of doing things. So those of you who are familiar with how you can kind of set up stencils or viewpoints, is you can have what's called a floating mode, where things can be dragged out of their parents, and then you show them with these, what we call a parent indicator. So that's the the black diamond there. So we're actually showing hierarchy here. So as you know, the graph structure we have behind Abacus is a hierarchical interconnected graph. Okay, so you have decomposition, or things made up of things. So where you're seeing here is these floating mode, or these layered way of doing things. You're actually seeing hierarchy, not just connections. Okay, so there's a few other things we haven't shown you here. So we certainly will have that hierarchical mode with boxes within boxes. Okay, that'll be there. The line styles between things will also be sympathetic to the line styles in the viewpoints and stuff like that. So there's a few other things to sort of come that aren't in this version. We're sort of where we're showing you guys, but certainly will be done in time when the release comes out.
Yeah, and hopefully you're seeing this as something that you could already start using. So I know traditionally you might have diagrams that show things like impact analysis views, but this ideally then becomes part of that. So if you do want to start exploring projects that are impacting projects that you're working on, where certain departments might be using unsecure applications, where there's a high concentration of maybe unsecure servers, for example, this is ideally the way that you can start navigating through the data, because it already exists. You don't have to draw anything, and it's just using that data behind the scenes to visually show you this graph view. So hopefully that's going to be a very exciting feature for you all to test. Now, the next feature that we're going to be looking at is what we call machine learning. I guess this comes with a slight bit of background. So machine learning these days, of course, we're applying it to Abacus here, but you'll see machine learning hidden, if you like, through a lot of the services that you already use today. So big companies like Amazon use it for showing you trustworthy reviews, or PayPal uses it for fraud detection and transaction cycles. Various companies use machine learning behind the scenes to help give you predictions on some of the values that you're going to be using. The main use case for EA is trying to take the guesswork, if you like, out of enterprise architecture, or out of your architectural models, and help effectively aid in those essential business decisions. Now, what does this mean from a more of an EA perspective and the data that you have? Well, traditionally, you'll see in this view here, you might be working off catalog-based views. So you can think of this as a collection of data points. In this instance, you're actually looking at the applications, or an application portfolio. And what this machine learning concept does is it actually suggests values that you might traditionally not have known could have been filled in, if you like. And it's using some of the models that are already built in Abacus to start predicting some of these values. Now, the machine learning concept, or the algorithms behind the scenes, develop over time, of course. So there's a minimum set of data that you might initially need for this machine learning algorithm to run. And what that means is you'll start building up data sets over time. Those machine learning algorithms behind the scenes can start retraining on that data, and then start providing more accurate measures for you. That's, of course, in line with the real-time concept, which means if you start adding content, you start changing some of the values, it's going to suggest or predict values based on the previous model that it's already trained against. And then, of course, you'll get, as you can see on the pop-up here, a confidence interval, or a confidence score. Okay, so this is trying to tell you that it's relatively certain in some of the values that it's showing you. And of course, it's up to you then as architects to decide to accept or reject those values. So we are inferring these values according to all of the other properties that are in this model. You're seeing the properties highlighted in this instance. Of course, that's not the only thing machine learning works against. So of course, it's also going to start suggesting connections, maybe descriptions of applications or other objects. But certainly, for those of you who've used ABACUS, those are the two core concepts there. So the properties and the connections are effectively what this machine learning platform then allows us to start predicting. The machine learning concept, I guess, to some extent comes hand in hand with some of the algorithms that you might already be using. And you might try to classify those into two different types. So we have these kind of non-deterministic based approaches using machine learning, and where the algorithms are more kind of deterministic options. So yes, the machine learning concepts are going to start predicting values, but it's certainly not something that you should almost become too lackadaisical about. If you do objectively know how to measure some of these properties, then absolutely you should be doing that using one of the algorithms. Hopefully, this machine learning concept tries to almost explain the unexplainable and help you, of course, reach a higher level of data quality, and then starts feeding into some of the other features that you'll actually see coming along as well.
Yeah, so behind the scenes as well, there's a fair bit of dare I say, configuration you're able to set with the machine learning. So as Andrew sort of alluded to, there's kind of a minimum amount of data you need before the training will begin, because otherwise you're ending up with just pointless recommendations. You can see here this confidence is around 60% for this recommendation, that's suggesting that the disaster recovery should be gold. Now, the whole point of machine learning is we don't presuppose to understand why or what the logic is that comes to that. Because there's been sufficient data available to train the model, we might as architects go, well, look, if the criticality is 5 and we want to retain it, so that's the 2 columns just to the left there, hey, 9 times out of 10, we've said we should have a gold DR provision. So of course, that's what the machine has learnt, that it might just be those 2 factors that actually contribute strongly to that recommendation for the gold recommendation. Now, those red question marks, they actually do start to give you some insight into how contributory each of the factors might be to the underlying models that are happening there. But if you've only got 5 rows, it may not be good enough, because you can see 3 rows down below that, you've got retain and criticality 5, and hey, guess what? The DR is bronze. So that's the thing. These are not deterministic, because if they were deterministic and we had an algorithm that we'd written in Algorithm Composer that said if, we'll come to filtering because you can do ifs, if recommendation equals retain and criticality equals 5, then set DR to gold, well, guess what? That bronze would no longer be there anymore. So where things are deterministic, do them deterministically. Where they're not, let the machine start making suggestions. So that's the first thing, is you do need a certain number of rows before that'll kick in, and that's user settable. The next thing is retraining. As Andrew said, you don't need to retrain every time a new bit of data comes along. So there's a schedule. You can set that up to be, let's say it's daily, hourly. It can be event driven. So when you upload, 1,000 new rows from a spreadsheet, you can tell it to, that'll trigger a retrain. And thankfully, this all happens on some big, powerful Amazon servers. So don't worry, this is only in the matter of minutes. We've obviously been doing some pretty good stress testing on this, and we know it's in the matter of minutes for some very large models. Okay, so certainly it's not that computationally intensive. The other thing, which I'm not sure if Andrew mentioned, is it works on the entire repository. Okay, so regardless of what columns you might be showing in a catalog here, there may be other properties or attachments that are leading to the recommendation that's being made that you're not aware of. So trust me, we've been watching this and looking at it for some months now, and sometimes it throws a suggestion that you struggle to try to understand where it's coming from. And that's because there's a column that we're not showing in a given catalog that really is the strong influencer to that recommendation or that suggestion. So bear that in mind. It's the entire repository that's being used to train these models. You're just looking at a view of that repository through a catalog. Okay, so yeah, trust me, you'll have a lot of fun, like we have for many months now, trying to validate what's there, and that's essentially what's happening here. Those red boxes, it's just a suggestion. You can ignore them, you can reject them, as Andrew said, but of course, if you accept them, they go towards basically kind of reinforcing the learning that's being done, because it's suggesting gold, and if you say gold, guess what? That's going to, next time it gets trained, strengthen that prediction. Anyway, lots of fun.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even looking at some of the future potential here, there's huge scope for where this can lead to. So even now for 7, where we're obviously looking at things like predicting properties and connections, we can absolutely see this in the future being much more of a wider aspect to that. So potentially then even predicting, full architecture structures or even models and suggestions being built around those. So currently, yes, properties and connections. And that's going to be a great start for accelerating some of the quality of data that you have already in your repositories. So the next feature is what we're classifying here as interactive Gantt charts. So Gantt charts traditionally, I'm sure most of you have produced these before, and it's quite likely that most of you have sat through on some of the WebEx we've done on road mapping and would have seen some of these. Gantt charts, I guess, traditionally being relatively static. What I mean by that is there might have been times when, or even today, even customers still build these in PowerPoint slides. You might be publishing these to PDF files. And they're static in the sense of you don't really have much freedom or flexibility to start drilling down into that content. So the interactive nature of these particular Gantt charts means now that you can starting from a high level. And the one that you're seeing on the screen here is actually from a project or program level, and then drilling down into the applications, the departments, or the processes that are then going to be impacted by those projects. These are all, again, as all the visualizations you've seen in Enterprise, are automatic in the sense that when there are data updates behind the scenes or in any of the catalogs or via any of the imports, then of course these Gantt charts are then going to reflect that data. You don't have to go away and start reproducing these views. They will be updated according to when you update that data. Now, some of you might have already seen parts of these interactive Gantt charts already. ABACUS 7 is actually going to be deploying these as out-of-the-box visuals, which means that you can quite quickly start building these up in existing dashboards that you have. And therefore, hopefully, we can do away with some of the static reports that might be being created now. The other thing, and that's worth bearing in mind, is we're talking about Gantt charts in terms of lifecycle dates. So maybe things like into production dates for applications, vendor support dates, end of life dates for projects. These dates in particular tend to exist on a single level, so on applications or on projects. Some of the algorithms that you'll see in ABACUS that are also out of the box that lead into these charts is then rolling those data up to a higher level. Okay, so you might be rolling up application support dates to those processes or the capabilities they're supporting. You might be rolling up the minimum maximum values from projects up to the programs they're involved with. So there's a whole bunch of other aspects behind the scenes for these Gantt charts. The main thing, of course, is making it interactive and making sure that you can drill down through those concepts. The next feature is some enhancements to the existing algorithm composer functionalities that we have in ABACUS. So I know that some of you have already started to create some of these algorithms, which is great. We'll get on to how we can start sharing those towards the end of the presentation. But you'll also see that there are some out-of-the-box ones that you can start leveraging on day one. The enhancements we've made here, however, one of the main ones is the ability to start filtering the content. Okay, so now we've introduced this block, or filter block, and you'll see because they're algorithms, they're no code, they are effectively dragging and dropping blocks of functionality onto this view so that you can start building up different algorithms, if you like, or different ways of calculating different properties or connections. There's a simple one here showing how we're getting a list of all the applications and then filtering those according to any that have ERP in their name. There are some slightly more advanced or extensive versions of this. So what we're actually looking at here is the ability of then setting this application manager property. Okay, so the background here is that the data behind the scenes, we've seen that there's some trend in the fact that there are very specific people, or in this case, a single person, that is the application manager for some of the accounting processes that we have behind the scenes. So to increase data quality, you might find that some of those values are blank. because we've identified that as a trend, you can then start building this algorithm up. So you'll see that first block there, get processes. So the first thing we're actually doing is getting a list of all the processes that we have in our model. Okay, then leveraging something like that filter block, we can then filter all of those processes to only show the ones, or only bring back the ones that have the word accounting in its name. The other feature you'll see here as well as I go through is the algorithm results section at the bottom. Now keeps track of the results that each block is pulling back. So you can actually see and verify that each stage is working as expected. And that means you can start validating that information much quicker and of course live. So as you make changes to those blocks, of course, those results are going to be updated as well. After filtering, you'll see we have get this apps used block, which is now looking at all the applications that those processes use, i.e. just those accounting ones. And then we can set this constant in the next block, which is a constant value of Mark Green. So we identified earlier on, Mark Green was the application manager for all the accounting processes, or for the applications that those processes use. And that final block, you'll see that we can set that property. You'll also notice in that set constant block that we have a couple of other operations in there as well. So we can start doing some text operations and like joining text values together. So there's some subtle enhancements here that are definitely going to enhance, improve some of the algorithms that you've already built. And that filter block means that you can be much more specific now around how you might set different values. Okay, so we talked earlier on about non-deterministic and deterministic options. This, by all means, is certainly one of those deterministic ones. We know who the application manager is. We want to set that on a number of processes or applications. And this is one of the key ways of doing that. We don't need any machine learning concepts in this case to try and tell us what it should be. And we can tell simply by the trend how we can set that ourselves. The abilities here, I guess, go hand in hand with some of the other areas we've looked at. And in fact, you can actually see one of the algorithms being built here. So again, we've talked about these as being filter blocks, and I've shown you a very simple one where we're setting the application manager. But these algorithms themselves provide a lot more enhanced functionality. And in this instance, what you're looking at is an algorithm being built to start predicting, or at least setting, the recommendation values for some of the processes that we have. Okay, and again, we can find what the recommendation of those processes should be based on the applications that they're using. Okay, so we might take an average of all the applications they're using and then roll those values up and across our model to effectively produce this heat map. So some of you are probably more familiar with something like the time concepts of tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate. And that's certainly one of the methods we're using in this instance to set those recommendation values and to have these heat map views, in this case on this business capability map.
So yeah, again, just sort of returning, remember, just before we were talking about the whole machine learning autocomplete side of things, it is really important to appreciate, we see ABACUS as a platform, right? It's an analysis platform. It's a combination of sometimes deterministic, sometimes let's call it non-deterministic. I think academically that's possibly a bit unfair to the machine learning, but I guess the word I sort of use, and again, don't take this the wrong way, is don't be lazy. If there is a deterministic algorithm that you can no code, then no code it. If that's one of the columns in a portfolio of things, have that being calculated in real time, definitively or deterministically. That may then in turn be an input or one of the factors that are being used in a machine learning way. Okay, so don't be lazy. If there are known formulas, for want of a better word, that you use in your organization, again, like Andrew said, the example, if you know that if it's got anything to do with accounting, then Mark Green should be the application manager, then do that. Because guess what? When you've got 2 rows in your catalog, you'll get that value. Okay, sure enough, the machine would have learned that that was the answer once you've been using this for, dare I say, enough time that you've got 100 rows where you've put Mark Green tediously against every application that is an accounting one. So use the deterministic algorithms to help the machine learn. Okay, so don't, I hope you guys can see that. I don't know. I hope you guys can see how you can float back and forth between these 2 worlds. Okay, code where you know it, and of course let the machine suggest where there may be some insight you didn't realize. You didn't realize, oh, I had no idea that actually Mark was the guy about accounting. Good. Now let's actually set an algorithm for that, and let's not bother the machine wasting its time to do that.
And the other thing to point out here is, and we've talked in depth around this concept before, is having these kind of subjective and objective measures. The classic case there is, if you give someone a list of the applications that they own and you get them to rate them in terms of how critical they are, I guarantee they're all going to come back as highly critical. The idea behind these algorithms is that you can start objectively saying if they're critical or not. How many processes do they use? How many users are there? How much is it costing us? You can use these other properties as feeds into these algorithms so that you can objectively say whether or not these processes or applications are critical. Okay, so that's absolutely one of the key areas we see that's being used a lot more as well.
And while we'll never admit it, there is, of course, permissions in here, and you might hide the results of any algorithm from the broader stakeholder community. Let's say your recommendation is retire. You possibly don't want everyone to know that. So permissions is important in all this. Just because, the algorithm engine can still calculate stuff, of course, but that may not be shared with everybody. It's all needs to know kind of stuff. The algorithm engine will still use those values to inform its, to train its models. But nonetheless, just because you've calculated doesn't mean you have to tell everyone either.
Exactly. The next feature is actually the ability to start saving and ultimately sharing some filtered views that you've already created in some dashboards. This works as a URL basis. But effectively, the kind of use case this stemmed from was at times when you're building dashboards, you're usually going through these catalog views, some of the charts that you've created, and you're starting to understand how all this hangs together by, in this case, maybe applying some filters, maybe only looking at the highly critical applications that you have, maybe seeing what's being retired at some point this year, and you might get to a key decision point. In this instance, we're looking at a specific application that's highly critical to the organization, and yet it's being retired in 2019. Now, previously, I think when you get to these decision points, you might suggest that people go in and start filtering these views themselves. You might try and build up a report around some of this. But really, the effect that this feature has is means you can start saving these filters. And you can just about see that in the URL field there. You'll see a bit more details in a few seconds. But that URL field is saving all those filters that you've applied to the entire dashboard, and then gives you the option of both saving and copying that URL. So what you're trying to do here is to focus a specific stakeholder or business owner on a key decision point, and also promoting the use of a single dashboard. You don't really have to start developing 10, 15 different dashboards for different views. You can just apply those filters, save them as URLs, and then ideally you'll move on to one of the other features that we've enhanced, is that ability to then start sharing that URL. Okay, so we've applied the filters, and what you're seeing here now is the ability to instantly start a conversation with someone directly from your dashboard. You can see that URL there is populated, and those who are astute and have good sight can hopefully read some of that string there, where it's basically concatenating the filters like the criticality values and the lifecycle dates. And that's, of course, then shareable. And so this enhanced collaboration feature means that you can instantly spark up a conversation via Teams or Skype or email or any other method that you want to use, to make sure that you aren't then just swiveling chairing around to different applications. You have direct feeds into these areas. And of course, now this person instantly has access to a filtered view that's very specific for their needs. Okay.
Yeah, one of the ways, so we've been using this, of course, as you can imagine, internally. One of the ways this is pretty effective is because it's a URL and it persists, we make it tabs in Teams. Okay, so again, as Andrew said, the same dashboard, let's say it's your applications, right? You could have exactly the same dashboard, but then have 5 tabs. The first tab is, Australian applications. The next tab is applications we're retiring in 2020. The next tab is, critical level 5 apps. Whatever it is, they can be persisted as tabs in Teams. That with all the SSO side of things, that onboards people really quickly. right? They can just go straight to that tab. They don't ever need to know anything other than you've focused the view for them specifically, or dare I say, whatever the tab is trying to do. So yeah, that big parameter, string that's there, you can certainly start to play with that. Like if you, as Andrew said, you would have been able to see that it actually had the number 5 in there. You could have made that 4. You technically can start to hack these. We've happily done that without having to generate the actual dashboard itself. You start learning how to actually code the filter URLs yourself. But yeah, definitely making it easier to share one set of content with multiple stakeholder groups. It's very powerful.
Yeah, and hopefully you're seeing a trend over these features as well. They are heavily focused on ease of access and usability. So you do want to try and get as much of this data available to consume by that wider organization. By having that ability to have these chat features means they're going to feel much more involved. And like Tim said, embedding this in existing applications that you're using, so whether that is in SharePoint or Teams or Slack, means it's going to be much more intuitive for people to use. And the benefit you'll quickly find is that the data quality in those systems will also increase over time. And that's a trend you'll actually see across a lot of the webinars across this digital summit that you've been part of so far, is about communicating and sharing that information to make sure that everyone else in the organization is fully involved in those decision points as well. Now, one of the final top core or key features, if you like, is both enhancements to the audit trails we have and a search feature. Now, the search feature you're seeing here, I guess, looks like a landing page. It is effectively going to be exposed in the existing toolbar within your enterprise dashboards. And what this gives you the ability to do is actually search through the entire repository for, in this instance, we're looking for applications or processes or any object that might be existing within your repositories or your architectures. The thing to notice, as you can see the search happening here, is it's actually predicting some of the values as you start typing. Okay, so the nuance to that, I guess, is it's a minimum of 3 characters, if you like, at the beginning. I mean, it is searching for at the beginning of a word, not necessarily in string context. Now, what that does mean is once you have those search results, you can do, as what's shown on the screen here, navigate to that details page. Okay, so using that search functionality, you can actually start looking through the applications that you have, bring up this detail page, and then you'll see all the traditional views in here that show you the properties, in this case, of the applications, and the references of those, and of course the standard Sankey style diagrams that are in there as well.
And it's important to appreciate that when you're typing in those strings, it's not just searching the names of components or connections or anything like that. It's looking in the descriptions of them. It's looking in the values of the properties themselves. Okay, so you don't have to be too concerned. For example, if someone's created an attachment to a collection of components which describes something, then of course it'll find those. But if the value is a pick list and you're trying to find the values in the pick list that meet that criteria, so you could type retire in here, right? And it would actually list all of the applications you flagged as retire, and in fact all the other types of components that happen to have a property called retire too, property value called retire. So it's important to appreciate that it's very pervasive, like it will look inside. At the same time, it is, I'm going to use the word dumb. It does just use the 3 characters in order. Okay, so it certainly will look for those at the start of a word, as Andrew said. So it's the same way Google works. I don't know if you can go to the Google page, you'll see when you start typing, if you start typing ERP, it's not going to give you, whatever, perp. It'll just give you things that start with the string ERP. So the same as we're doing here. So we're trying to obviously use that as a metaphor. That was the design objective, of course, for the product team. But yes, it is very pervasive. You'll get some incredibly long lists of things if you're pretty, dare I say, careful. Or, I don't want to use the word lazy, but if you use a very common string, then you'll get thousands of results. So so be it, right? You can qualify that, of course, by being a bit more precise in your string. Okay.
Yep, and the other thing, I guess, where this comes in useful is you might not always know exactly what you're searching for. So having ABACUS that's suggesting as you start typing is a good way, because traditionally you might have just searched in catalog views, perhaps, but you might not have known if it was an application instance, an application component. So having that search mechanism searching through the entire repository means you're going to get much more or many more hits on what's available, and then you can actually choose from one of those.
Yeah, sorry, one thing as well, Andrew mentioned a landing page. So we're not sure how people are going to use this. In the way you can configure enterprises, you can give a starting dashboard for any user. So, it'll default to, dashboard number 23, or indeed the browser page, that's one of the pages that you can make the starting dashboard. So this search page is a landing page. You could choose to make this the starting page for any or all users. So yeah, we sort of see, especially if you're embedding this within Teams, it's very much like you might just make this the starting page. And that's it. When people go to the ABACUS tab in Teams, all they're going to get is a very simple, Google search style page, and that's it. They go from there. So we're not sure how people are going to use this, but you absolutely can set it up that way if you want. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing how people do use it. So
yeah, and hopefully you can see some of the potential of where this could be moving into. So far we're using search terms, but there's so many advancements that we're making. I'm working on some cutting edge stuff, so certainly not for 7, but we can definitely envision this almost being some kind of natural language that people can type in as well, where you just say, show me all the applications that are highly critical. You might eventually get to the stage where you don't need to be so specific, and ABACUS can start learning then from your search query. So there's definitely some scope and some potential here for some interesting search features and functionalities to come in the future as well.
And I'll just say, we're not going to do a chatbot.
Yeah, absolutely not.
But effectively, you could have that kind of, which is what Andrew says. We've already got some natural language processing, don't get me wrong, but we haven't really exposed that at the very level with some chatbot. So.
The other, I guess, 2 quick things on here are some enhancements to the audit trails. So audit trails in ABACUS, obviously traditionally, gives you that ability to see who and when changes have been made to any parts of your repository or any parts of your architecture. There's a few things in Enterprise that you currently would have seen, which is there is tooltips that come up as you start hovering over certain fields. So hovering over certain properties within catalog-based views. And what that does traditionally do is tell you who's made a change and when that change was made. The enhancement we're making to this is to actually quickly see what that change was. So traditionally, if you do have a list of all the applications, you can see that modified by date. You can see who's modified that certain application or that row in the catalog. But it's always quite difficult then to find out, what have they actually changed. And so having that available in that tooltip will give you that last change that has happened on that object, on that relationship, or part of the repository. Okay, so you can then quickly see what's changed, and then of course decide to review that if you need to. As we mentioned at the beginning, we were just covering some of the handful of the key features, but there are quite a few new features across both the services that we deliver, the way ABACUS Enterprise and ABACUS Studio work with each other. And some of those you can actually see listed here. Of course, we're not listing all 100 plus of those, but we try to pick out some of the key ones that we've seen quite useful. And some of these are replicating some functionalities that you'll find in Studio. So in ABACUS Studio, you can fix or freeze columns, and that now does apply to some of the ABACUS Enterprise catalogs that you'll be creating. There's also some key improvements to some of the Visio imports. So some of you would have seen this during some of the updates we've already rolled out for the Visio enhancements. We classify this, I guess, as a pixel perfect, but it's much more true now to your original Visios. A key portlet that we've added to Enterprise as well as this KPI portlet. That means you can actually have these quick metrics or quick properties instantly appear on the pages that you create. So those are key for things like complexity measures or costs of architectures or scenarios you're running. So there is really a highlight for that dashboard rather than having to actually filter down all the views. And of course, there's some other ones in here like color changes to bubble charts and enhanced impact analysis views as well. But for those of you who certainly are looking forward to 7, you'll of course get a list of all the features and functionalities that are coming in there as well. Another thing, I guess, just to reiterate, as Tim mentioned at the beginning, is this continuous release cycle that we have and how that's actually categorized into things like bug fixes, feature fixes, and platform releases. And that's going to be a key thing going forward, because it means we can be much more agile in terms of how we roll these features out. And it means you'll have access to these much quicker, rather than what traditionally might be known as kind of single releases every 6 months or so. There's a much more time to market option for us, I guess, but also means we can put these features in your hands much quicker than we traditionally might have been able to. So those are some of the really cool and some of the exciting stuff that hopefully you're looking forward to in the release of 7 towards the end of this year. There is a couple of other things which I guess aren't classified as features as such, but there are things that you'll find always get enhanced during our releases. And the first one I want to point out is the option to have all this content downloadable. And when we talk about downloadable content, we almost see this as becoming some kind of store. And so you can quickly see here some of the initial work we've been doing around providing an environment, a forum-based way, if you like, of uploading scripts and algorithms that you've been working on, and of course ones that we've been working on, to make it much more of an environment that people can start sharing things. Okay, and the community actually exists already. Some of you, and hopefully most of you, have joined up to that. I've seen some of the available solutions in there, some of the chats we've had with different customers, but certainly the downloadable content section is going to be enriched closer to 7, and of course going forward as well. And as usual, one of the key things, of course, is updates to existing frameworks and notations. So for some of you that were at the Open Group last week, we were there as well, and I was sat through some of the Archimate sessions. And so there are some key things that we've been updating across these frameworks. Archimate in particular actually has a few new concepts like value streams, which is actually going to be much more beneficial for building models these days. But certainly there are other enhancements to BizBook and quite a few other frameworks in here as well. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, these aren't tied to specific releases. If there are updates to these, we of course can roll those out very easily, make those available to existing customers, and actually make those available through the community. So you don't have to wait for the next release. Of course, as soon as these updates are made to frameworks and notations, they are then usually generally available to the public then as well. So I guess a couple of things, a quick thank you to everyone who's actually joined the webinar today. Hopefully it's been quite useful. You've seen some of the potential of where 7's going. But if you do want more information, then feel free to follow this link. And you can be reminded of some of the key updates that are coming up and when you'll actually have access to 7 as well.